Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hi, I'm Sadie Carpenter, co-host of the Leaving Eden podcast, and I was raised in a cult. I signed purity pledges. I cried at the altar. I went out door-to-door soul winning, and I didn't own a pair of jeans until I was 20 years old. I saw it all and did it all as I grew up, completely immersed, pun fully intended, in the independent fundamental Baptist movement. With my co-host Gavriel Hakohen, I unpack all of this, from the hilarious to the traumatic, back to the hilarious, on the Leaving Eden podcast. New episodes release every Monday on all podcast streaming platforms. We recommend new listeners start by checking out episode 57, in which we discuss the BITE model and give an overview of my personal story.
Hello listeners, and welcome to this week's mini-series, titled A Break in the Fog. I have been waiting for such a long time to bring this episode to all of you. Anyone listening who is familiar with this podcast, who is a long-time listener, may also find this conversation as mind-blowing as I did. It shook me for weeks. And if you are just tuning in today, I hope this mini-series can pique your interest enough to go back and connect the dots for yourself. Centered within this story is Molly Salans, a beautiful writer with a warm and brave soul, who captured her first-hand experiences inside a secretive and abusive group in her fictional award-winning thriller that is inspired by true events. What interlinks into this is something so much bigger, with other people from other parts of the world, people who I hold dear and think very highly of, becoming integral to understanding the bigger picture. To those people who are listening, you have my utmost respect. Anyone else who finds this episode particularly interesting, please reach out to me to let me know your thoughts. You can visit www.abreakinthefog.com to grab yourself a signed copy of Molly's award-winning book, A Break in the Fog. And now, here is Molly Salans. So hello, Molly, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today to chat about your experiences and your recent book publication, A Break in the Fog. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Well, sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Molly Salans. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, and I was in this cult for 7 years from 1975 to now I've forgotten the dates, 1978 to 1985. Those are the dates. And it took me, I did not realize that I was in a cult until 13 years after I left. And the cult was so very secret that even after I left, I never told a soul where I had been. So once I found out that I was in a cult, then I sat down individually with each of my family members and each of my friends and told them to start to finish what had happened to me.
I imagine that must have been quite an exhausting task.
It was exhausting and exhilarating at the same time. I could finally free myself from this so-called secret.
Did you find that your family members had similar reactions, or did they differ? Did a lot of people start to say, oh, well, that kind of makes a lot of sense because we really weren't sure where you'd gone?
Most people told me they had no idea. My father, when I first joined the cult and I was living at home, he was so insightful. And he sat me down. He said, "What's going on? Where are you going?" And I said, "Nowhere. I'm my own person now. I don't have to tell you. You know, I'm fine. Don't worry about me." But he knew something was up. And I think he was the most relieved when I told him. Yeah.
Break in the Fog is it's an exceptional book.
Okay.
I was engrossed from start to finish. It is a work of fiction, but it's based on your personal experiences. So I have so much to ask you about what is directly related to your experiences and what has either been dramatized or embellished for the sake of fiction. So I wondered if it would be okay for me to ask you about your experiences.
Yes, of course. Yes.
The main focus of the book is around Clara. Is Clara you for hypothetically is Clara yourself in this situation?
This is such an interesting question. Clara is a mixture of me and my oldest sister. And Wendy is an exaggerated character of me. I would say I'm much more hopeful than Clara was, a lot less cynical than Clara was. And I consider Clara to be a little more powerful, wanting to rise to the top, where I had no desire to do that. I didn't even know that was a possibility for me.
Oh, this is already so interesting. So did when you were growing up, did you idolize your older sister in the same way that Wendy does in some parts of the book with Clara?
So I grew up in San Francisco proper during the 60s and 70s. I was the middle of four children. And at that time, my sister and I did not get along. I adore her now. She's one of my best friends. I love her to pieces. But at the time, we were not friends. And I think that I often wondered what would it be like from the beginning if I had had an older sister who was really watching out for me. In many ways, she was watching out for me, but I didn't take it that way because she was so. So I'm kind of a mixture of both. And my brother and my younger brother and sister didn't make it into the book. It was too many characters for me, given that this was my first novel. I had to narrow it down somehow. Yeah.
The storyline in A Break in the Fog, there's significant turmoil within the family that lends itself to the situation that Clara finds herself in later on. Does this have any similarities to your experiences in your own childhood?
So my my um my parents were not Holocaust victims, and there are no Holocaust victims in my immediate family. I know that my great grandfather escaped the pogroms in Russia. What happened in my family was so different than what happened in the book, in that my father grew up very Jewish, and my mother did not know she was Jewish till she was around 20. No, yeah, she didn't know she was Jewish till around 20 or 21. So when they got married, both of them sort of denied religion and brought in culture. So I grew up with every holiday under the sun with no meaning whatsoever. So certainly there is a culture of Jewish, the Jewish humor and thought process, but there wasn't any religion. And my father, this part was true in the book. My father was a prominent doctor in San Francisco. And he did start an adolescent clinic, the first of its kind. He worked in the heart of the Fillmore district at the time, which was just about all African American. And he really wanted to get kids off of drugs and off the streets. So he got a grant from the federal government. He started a whole adolescent clinic. He got the parking lot across the street. And at Christmas, it was a Christmas tree lot. And during the year, it was a car wash. And he got all the kids working. And he always said, you always have to have a purpose in your life. So he was not the angry doctor that's described in the book. And that came to me in a whole another way, if you want to hear that. I really wanted to make a kind, loving father, the way Atticus is in oh, why can't I remember the name of the story now? Very famous book. But I couldn't. He was the conflict. And my mother was an artist and a pianist. That was all true. And she did have a mental illness of which I could never identify. She was not an alcoholic. She was not addicted to pills. Although it is true that her anxiety was very high, and my father did try to give her some medications, which she refused to take, halfway through her marriage. So she was an absent mother, and my father was more of a playful, fun father. So here we are in the heart of San Francisco, and there's absolutely no discipline in our household. And we are 4 kids doing whatever we want. And so my oldest sister, I find out years later, took over the discipline of the 3 of us. And because we were less than a year and a half apart, she decided to give me the worst. So she kind of expected and demanded a lot more from me than I resented her. She was not very kind to me. She's pretty brilliant herself in her creativity in the ways she hurt me. but but that was the household I grew up in. It was chaotic, it was artistic, it was musical, and it was scary. So the other piece I'll add is I enter high school in the heart, this is the heart of busing. So African Americans are being bused to my school, and my youngest sister was being bused to a different school. And there was absolutely no counseling, no group talk, no understanding of what was going on. And it was the heart of the civil rights in San Francisco and the rest of the nation. And the African American students were 4 times my size. I was this little kid, little white girl. And you walked into the lobby of George Washington High School where there was a statue of George Washington. All of a sudden, black paint was being thrown over George Washington. George Washington was black. Black paint is being thrown into the water fountain. Black water represents black power. In gymnastic, gym time was an absolute nightmare for me. So I'm growing up in high school, and at the same time, the principal of the high school is getting on the intercom maybe twice a month, maybe 3 times a month. Last night, Janis Joplin died of an overdose along with your fellow students, and here's who died of overdoses last night. No conversation about it, none. The teachers were not there was so much flirtation going beyond between male teachers and students. It was beyond belief. So I experienced high school as a very, very scary time. In addition to this, because my father was working with adolescents, sometimes maybe once a month, maybe once every 2 months, the doorbell was ringing at 2 or 3 in the morning. There were kids strung out begging for my father's help. How they got the address, everything was exposed in phone books at that time. So it was a very, very scary time. Now, a part in the book where Anna, the mother, is playing the piano and the kids are outside watching, it's a free concert. That part was true. I came home one day and all these guys were all over the front steps with their guitars, stinking of patchouli oil, their long hair. Oh, wow, man, a free concert. I was 4'8" or 4'9". I was absolutely terrified. And I run in through the back door. I go around the alley and run in through the back door, and mom's at the piano. And I was terrified. I said, Mom, these guys are out there. She looked outside and she sat up really straight. Now, she wasn't high. She wasn't on drugs. She just went, oh, I have an audience. And she just kept So I grew up in absolute terror. A lot of people in this country like to romanticize the 60s and 70s in San Francisco. For me, it wasn't a romantic time. It was absolutely terrifying.
From the things that I've read, the research that I've done, it does feel sometimes that there was a dark underbelly. There was definitely a dark underbelly, and the drug crisis was prolific, especially mostly in San Francisco because that became the echelon for the hippie movement, and there was this underbelly that as the counterculture movement began to die out, the drug dealers moved in and everybody was going from marijuana and kind of LSD to harder drugs, lots of heroin, lots of ecstasy, and things changed really, really quickly, and it kind of became like a playground for people that were distributing drugs.
It's very true. And at the same time, this was a breeding ground for cults. It was the perfect place for cults. We had the Moonies, there was a Hare Krishna, a Krishna group, there was Jim Jones, and God knows what other cults were growing up there, including the one I joined. It was just crazy. And you're right that it really, really got out of control very rapidly. And it kind of culminated with Jim Jones, with the 962 people committing suicide and were in Guinea, I think it was.
Down the road in Santa Monica, you have Synanon, and then over in Laurel Canyon, Manson's with his people doing all of his stuff. So California is just the epitome. There was also the Source family as well. Like the epitome of cult creation is like California. It always goes back to the surrounding Los Angeles.
It was crazy and it seeped up to San Francisco very quickly and got into the airports. The Krishnas were everywhere handing out roses. You know, you look so sad today. We're having a dinner. Come and cheer up, have some good food. It was just absolutely nuts looking back on it. How anybody, well, a lot of people didn't survive that time, but how anybody did. And we had Watergate in the middle of all of that, where Nixon was caught breaking into the Democratic tapes and files and everything else. So politically, civically, and it also was following the assassination of President Kennedy, the assassinations of Martin Luther King, and the assassinations of Robert Kennedy, all with, those two within months of each other in 68. So it was a breeding ground of disaster and believe in God and come to this group, we'll take care of you, quite a breeding ground for all of that. It was
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18 plus.
Fascinating to hear you talk about that from a first person perspective, because all I know is the research that I've done looking back on history, but it's really quite something to read all of that stuff and then have somebody say, I was there, I lived it, and I can tell you it was like this, it was like this. And the dynamics in the classroom that you mentioned, it's almost like blurred lines between professionalism and positions of power being exploited. What is consent in an age where women are being empowered, feminism is on the rise, and free love is a thing that's almost become part of the social structure.
That's right. So much so that I did not graduate on stage in high school. There was no prom. There was no football team. Because this was conventional, and we students just washed it out. There's just like you cannot participate in anything that's smacks of convention. So all of that was washed out, and I never joined them, but my sister did. I think my sister did. There were tea groups that the teachers formed, and these tea groups were peer confrontation groups where you would get out your anger, and then you just stay mad. And it was all about trying to get your rage out. I'm not clear what they were, but one teacher in the fall accosted me and he said, "Oh, Goddess Molly, you look so beautiful today. You should come rap with me after class. My wife and I had just a beautiful daughter this summer dawn, and you should just come and rap with me because you're so beautiful." Oh these things just absolutely freaked me out. And this would happen in English class. A teacher sat us around in a circle and said, "We need to connect with each other before we can begin class. I want you all to look at each other in the eye and tell each other something really positive about each other." And this one student looked at the teacher and she said, "Oh, Mr. So-and-so, you have the most beautiful blue eyes." And you just knew they were sleeping together, but you had no words for it, no way to describe it. It just was so, so creepy and unsafe. That's the best way I can describe it, although I didn't have those words for myself when it was happening. And I know that I wasn't the only one. And I don't know how many students at that time were actually abused, how much of it they would say looking back that they were either coerced or it actually was consensual. Because by 17, 18, I don't know that it can be, but who knows? So all of that was the breeding ground for me to find safety. By the time I graduated college, all I wanted, I was severely depressed. I was thinking suicidal thoughts all the time. In high school, I had a plan and didn't carry through with it. And it just got worse in college. And all I wanted was to be loved like anybody. And all I wanted was a real boyfriend. I wanted to get married. I was very, very hurt by the free love concept. I couldn't handle it. I needed meaning in my life, and I thought for sure a man would bring that. I wanted a baby very badly. I wanted children, and I thoroughly believed that a husband and children would take care of me. And I didn't think about career. That wasn't anything that I was encouraged to do in my family, not because my father was misogynistic, although my mother might say that he was. To us girls, he was not. But it was such a firm belief that girls just get married. They don't need a career. It was just such a firm belief growing up. And even through college, women were talking about having careers, but that I thought, oh, I don't need that. I'll have a man to support me, So I was depressed. I was probably clinically depressed when I graduated college and didn't know that. I knew I was depressed, didn't know I was clinically, how serious it was. And at that time, you would talk to a psychiatrist and you were given heavy duty medication or you were hospitalized. Those were the options. So that didn't occur to me. Right? So I'm accosted by this group of people, and I'm invited to a meeting, and I walk into this meeting, and the Damien figure is as gorgeous as described in the book. And the men, there's equal amount, I think there were probably an equal amount of women as men who were members of the cult. Absolutely drop down gorgeous. And one begins to immediately flirt with me, and my heart's already like, oh, maybe we'll get married. This is how idealistic I was. And they were all dressed counterculturally, but in a very cool way. Like none of them had long, stringy hair. They had clear eyes. I forgot what that looked like. They didn't smell of patchouli oil or patchouli. How do you say that word? We'll have to look it up. Patchouli oil. Yes, they were dressed casually, but their shirts were tucked in, kind of open, and jeans, and sometimes Birkenstock sandals, but sometimes socks and shoes too. It was just a very different look. And of course, the first thing I did was look at the men's hands, and there were no wedding rings. I thought I had my pick. And so, of course, that was the first deceit because they were all married and they all had children, but I didn't know that at the time. And I was a writer. Writing saved my life through high school and college, writing poetry mostly. And in my journals, every sentence began, "What is this ache in my heart? I feel so depressed. It makes me want to die. I am hurting so much." So the Damien figure begins this meeting with, like in the book, have you ever had that ache in your heart that it hurt so much you wanted to die? And the way he said it, his charisma was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. And even though he said that ache has something to do with your longing for God, all through high school and college, I was dissing God with my friends. We'd spend hours drinking coffee cups this high, dissing God, because there were the Moonies, there was, Jim Jones. We knew it was crazy and that this entity could not possibly exist. Oh, they're the born again Christians all over high school and college as well. So here he's saying that ache has something to do with God. And in thinking about why I joined, it was for the men and it was for the promise of community. But I think there is something very deep down that knew he was telling the truth. Or perhaps it was something about everybody in that group was nodding. And this was a brand new way of thinking about that ache. So in a very odd way, that cult experience saved my life. Because even though it was crazy and it abused the idea of God like you cannot believe, it got me interested, it got me curious about who is God and who am I and is there a soul and what if there really is something, right? And I did get married in the cult and I did have a baby. And the birth of my baby actually saved my life. I had a purpose now, and I knew I had to be better for her.
You say that it's a wild notion that the group saved your life, despite everything that happened. Those first few weeks, you're not subjected to horrific abuse or coerced in any way. It's the love bombing honeymoon phase of finding this new group. And a lot of the time when people talk about their initial experiences, irregardless of love bombing, there are these experiences, these out of body or otherworldly or unexplainable experiences that people have that tie them or marry them to the group forever or until they have to leave to save their lives or they slowly wake up and realize what's been happening. So I don't think it's that unthinkable that you could have that experience. You're at such a low point in your life where it really is, am I going to continue living or not? And to come across a group that is speaking to your soul almost.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary.
is a huge thing. And the utopia that people find in the initial stages of these groups is it's the sell, isn't it? It's the sale that's the thing that hooks you in. And then every time you think of leaving, it's what will happen if I leave? Will I be okay? Will I go back to not wanting to be here? Or you stay in the group chasing that experience. How can I get that initial experience back again? How can I? Do you feel like maybe I'm just rambling on, but do you feel like these are any of the experiences that you had?
Absolutely. To the T. To the T. The first year I was in, I was the apple of everybody's eye. I could do no wrong. For the first time, you probably know this as a therapist, as I know this, when you run a group, people begin to play their family roles and project onto people who they think are, so that's what happened. And for the first time in my life, instead of being compared to my older sister, my younger brother, and I was less than, all of a sudden I'm being compared as, you should look at Molly. She's a new student. Look at what she's doing. And not realizing that it's the comparison that brings you up and down and has nothing to do with the truth. I'd never been built up like that. And I think my older sister can say the same thing, that perhaps she was always compared to me, but I never saw it that way, right? But in our talks over the many years, it was the same for her. So here I am suddenly like, oh my God, people are finally liking me, not even seeing, the word seeing me wasn't the word, it was people like me. Maybe I can do something well, even though I wasn't doing anything, I was just showing up for the meetings. So.
A few questions that I had about your earlier life experiences in comparison to the book before we move on to Damien. And I have a lot of thoughts about Damien. Do you feel like your father's relationship with the children that he supported and the parentification that took place between your older sister and yourself and your younger siblings, do you think that added to your search for something deeper, a deeper connection or a stronger family unit?
I was definitely looking for a stronger family unit. There's no question. As I say, it was not my intention when I started out to make my father, to make Joe such a fearful, scared, PTSD, angry guy. That wasn't, I wanted to do more of a kinder, understanding father, who my father really was. But at the same time, in the community, my father was idolized. Everybody absolutely adored him. And my grandmother adored him. And I think deep down, subconsciously, it taught me I would never meet anybody like my father. And internally, looking back on it, I believe my father suffered some depression. And he could get angry unexpectedly, but it was mostly over asking for money. And I think he really struggled between, am I a father loved for being a father, or am I loved for my money? And I think he really, really struggled very deeply with that question. But as a kid, as a teenager, I did, because he would say, if you need anything, please ask. And the minute you would ask, he'd just blow up. So it was very hard, and it was difficult to talk with him about it. Years later, when he was much older, I was so thankful I could have that conversation with him. And as he got older and older, he became kinder and kinder and kinder. The Damien character in the cult, you're asking, was he in the fact that he was charismatic, I believe my father probably had some charisma in him. He was a very good speaker, and this was it. The Damien character was so insightful. he could read anybody like this and get right to that very vulnerable point. And when my father was an unusual doctor, he wasn't a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but he was a cardiologist. That when he sat people down, he would talk to them, and he would take a blood pressure before and after he spoke. And he'd come home and he'd say, really, the art of medicine is to listen. That's all you need to do. So I know that his patients just loved him to pieces. I knew some of them because he was so insightful. So when I joined the cult, he often sat each of us down. So, okay, tell me what's going on. You look really unhappy these days, and I almost felt like sometimes he read my journal, but I hid it so well. And I knew he wasn't the type to go looking for it. He just knew.
He sounds like an incredible man. He really does sound wonderful, and I can see why you might think that you could never meet anybody that would live up to. I just suppose I was wondering if during your bouts of deep depression, whether you might grow resentful of a father that is giving so much time and focus to other children that are not his children, or whether that is the child inside me who perhaps would feel that way.
No, that's a very insightful question. I think at some point I did feel that way. There's a picture of my home on the outside, and you don't really get what's going on the inside. And so as a teenager, my father and I'm just remembering this now, as you say, especially around 15, 16, he and I got into some very, very explosive fights, really explosive. It was awful. And they were far and few between, but they were horrifying for both of us. And there was never any apology about it from me or from him. And nobody came to me. My mother didn't come to me. We had babysitters, live-in babysitters at the time. None of them came to say, hey, your father's having a hard time. Nobody. I think the two of us terrified everybody. It was bad. I was slamming doors, and one day he stopped. He was at a stoplight, and I said, I'm getting out of the car. And I walked home, and I don't know how many miles home it was, but the fighting was so bad. And I really felt like he didn't have a clue as to what was going on with me. Now, given at that time, I was very depressed. I was probably heartbroken. And he may have been, his kids were growing up. He had a household of teenagers, God knows. And my mother was pretty absent, and neither of them really had any idea what to do with us. So I think there is some truth to that. Everybody loves dead. You have no idea who he is, from my experience at that time. Yeah.
That is the end of part 1 of this mini-series. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault Podcast.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.